Hey folks! Welcome to episode 35 of an ongoing series where we basically take the camera anywhere we want, and we try to find secrets and new discoveries to some of our favorite games. Zelda is a very special franchise, and so I thought I should bring on some Zelda-related guests. And with that said, let's get going. So the first thing I want to talk about is at the very start of the game, and it's, well, what other way can I put this? There's Shadow Link at the very beginning of the game. Now, at first I was convinced that this is actually Shadow Link. They gave him unique eyes and everything. But I was a little bit wrong. See, there's several layers to Link's eye, and that white spot is the light reflecting off of his eye. Now, I don't know why this one texture on this model is not dark like the rest of the model, but in the end we got a creepy Link for a very creepy scene. And during the final scene of Link's dream sequence, we find the imprisoned in a dark area. But where is this dark area? I would have just imagined it was in the void. But I guess that was a foolish assumption. So then where is he? Apparently, they made a black space for him and tucked him and Link underneath Skyloft. I never would have figured that, but I guess it makes sense. It makes it easier to load up Link's room once you start the game. Gotta apologize if this seems a little disorienting. The camera moves around a lot, but it's all for the purpose of showing you what happens to Zelda's bird after it delivers her letter to Link. In a lot of instances, the animators for Skyward Sword just stopped animating whenever something was off screen, and this actually happens quite a bit in this game, which you'll notice very soon. So the team didn't think it was worth the effort to make a letter for Link to read, so instead we get a back shot of him. So what's going on in the front? Well, if you look at the front, you can find that he's holding the sealed envelope with a dulled expression on his face.
So here in Link's room we have a wardrobe filled with tons of random junk. According to the game, there's nothing useful in here, which might be true, but that's not important. What's interesting about this wardrobe is that once Link closes it, the items inside disappear. Don't believe me? Let's take Magic Camera inside and take a look. Looks pretty empty to me. Now let's slow down the game and see when the items disappear. We'll do this in super slow-mo, that way you can get a better idea of what's happening. Now, once Link closes these doors, everything should disappear. My best guess is that they save space by not having the items load. I'll let you be the judge of that.
Alright, it's time for some more cinematic shenanigans. And in this particular scene, Zelda's attention is caught by her father, and the camera is at a very specific angle, and you can still see Zelda blinking, despite the fact that it's nearly off screen. Now, you'd be surprised how aware the animators were of this, because when you turn the camera over, you can find out that only one of her eyes is blinking, which makes it look like that she's got a twitch in her eye. Oh, I'm so reminded of the Twilight Princess episode right now. So you may notice in the scene that Zelda's father his face lights up as his daughter runs away. And you may be wondering to yourself why, or maybe you never did, but you might find this funny. The moment that he makes this expression, if you zoom the camera out, you can see that Zelda... I don't even have words for this.
So here we have the famous cutscene where Link's pushed off Skyloft by the well-meaning, if a little bit careless, Zelda. If we take the camera away from where it's originally positioned, excusing Link's horrifying scream, we can see where he falls to when he's off screen. And he seems to just be chilling there, having a casual mid-air nap. Comfy.
You know, one thing I've never shown in any of my Zelda episodes is what it looks like from a different angle when Link gets a new item. Now, granted, Wind Waker without my help actually already kind of showed you what this looks like, but it still remains fascinating to me in a completely different game. And to me, it just made sense to share it.
At the Chamber of the Sword, we have the cutscene where Link meets Fi. During this scene, there's a flashback sequence of Zelda herself. As she tells Link of the surface, we can see her surrounded by what appears to be nothing but darkness. But if we take the camera to a different angle, that's definitely not a dark room like we expected it was. And hey, that's the chamber that Gaebora, Fi, and Link are in. Well, what do you know? Zelda's flashback takes place in the same room where we are. presumably to cut down on loading times and make the cutscene flow a little better.
Hey, birds! Oh, these are some pretty awesome birds. They got the little quail thing in the front, just like the kikwis. I probably pronounced that wrong, but I'm not even worried about it. But in this scene, we're not going to be just talking about birds. That's right, kids. We're going to be talking about the birds and the bees. So if we zoom in over here, we can see the beehive, and there's actually fully modeled bees that attack Link when he gets near the beehive. Now, it's a lot easier to see what these guys look like up close when it's not pure chaos and they're trying to kill Link.
And it's a beautiful day in Faron Woods. Sunny skies, cool breezes. Perfect day to relax. Or it would be if it was actually a nice day. As is the case with many other things in Skyward Sword, nothing here is quite as it seems. For example, if you take the camera and pull it back around Skyview Temple, you can see that the dungeon part of it isn't really there, which begs the question as to where Link goes when he's doing his hero business. Furthermore, the area around the temple looks like it's an endless amount of green and trees, but as you might expect, pull the camera back a little more and all these locations are just flat 2D renders. Looking at the environment from this angle, you really gain a sense of appreciation for how Skyward Sword used the most out of the Wii's technical limitations to create a world that feels alive and full of adventure. And also some flat Paper Mario trees.
Now granted, we got a good look at the back end of the Skyview Temple in one of the earlier scenes, but we didn't get to see what happens when we take Link through there. So if we get over the gate and start walking around, we can see that, oh, okay, we walked through a tree, that's unusual. Oh! So this was either incredibly incidental or incredibly meticulous on the part of the developers. If you take the camera through this grating, normally you'd find nothing on the other end. But in this case, when you take it through the grating, you can actually find an opposite side grate that goes into another room in the dungeon.
Now we're taking a look at the large central room in Skyview Temple that has the Stalfos fight in the center. What I didn't know was just how bright this temple really is. Once we take Magic Camera around, we see that there is a filter applied that makes the temple a little bit darker. The size of this room is huge too. Taking the camera around and seeing just how massive this room is without having to use the beetle really gives a sense of the temple's true size. Once we zoom out, you can catch a glimpse of the adjacent room, which uses the same skylight as this one.
So how could we forget about our old buddy Girahim? In his introductory scene, you can see him sliding towards Link before he comes up behind him, which I admit looks a little bit awkward. But what's even cooler is that tongue scene. We all remember that tongue scene because it was a little disturbing. And by a little disturbing, I mean pretty disturbing. And what's cool is that if you slow down the footage, you can see the joints in the tongue, as it would be a lot harder for a game this old to have a wavy model. So instead, it's like papercraft.
Ah, Elden Volcano. One of my favourite areas from Skyward Sword. Great temple, great enemies, great music. But if you guys have ever wanted a better look at the volcano itself, my man Shesez has you covered. And just like that we can see the whole thing. And the trails of smoke coming out of the volcano itself aren't just a flat texture like I thought, they're actually animated. Huh. It turns out the entire area is rendered when Link's all the way up here, which I suppose adds a bit of realism. Hope you're not afraid of heights.
Fireshock from Twitter asks, is there anything below the ground for the magmas? And there is. It's really strange. So when we go below the ground, we can see that they do have legs. And I think that's supposed to be a tail, but they're all contorted and twisted. You can clearly see one of the legs pretty well, although it's really small. And then the other one is also there, but stretched out to an unbelievable degree, and then also super duper tiny. Now we'll explore the sky in just a little bit, but one thing I really wanted to show off immediately is the entrances to the three main areas of Skyward Sword. It's really cool because those three main areas have textures underneath the clouds. And not just a texture, but they also have a little black box that's bounding them in, so these are teeny tiny rooms. Or actually, they're giant rooms because of how small Link is compared to it. It's actually really funny to see how close these three areas are in relation when you consider the fact that these three texture rooms are practically right next to each other. Now this is one long scene, but it's because I want to show you all the textures to all 3 areas. Like for example, here we have the desert area, and what's really interesting too is that because you're not going to be able to ever see the entire texture playing the normal game, they double up on the textures here and there. It doesn't look like it, it's pretty seamless, but in reality there's an image that's being doubled up 2 or 3 times. And the last up is Elden Volcano. Unlike the desert, there's a little bit more geography to this area, which is relatable to the actual zone that you drop into. I gotta admit, out of all the things that I found in this game so far, this one's probably my favorite. And as for the sky itself, it's a little hard to see the scope, because the void is not black like it is in most games. Here, it's nearly the same color as the clouds themselves. So when we move the camera outside, yeah, sure you can see it, but it's tough to see exactly where it begins and ends. And now we're checking out the desert area, and when you zoom this area out, it's really cool because you can actually see the pattern that you normally see whenever you drop into the area. But what kind of surprised me and in turn kind of perplexes me is that there is a portion of this map where it has to load in the temple area. But as you see here, when we take the camera to the temple off in the distance in the other area, it doesn't look like the design or the textures were compromised whatsoever. Because normally when something's off in the distance like this and you have to load into that zone, the developers do a minimalism trick where they make it look like it's the same building off in the distance, but once you get closer, it has a lot less detail to it. But this is not the case. Next up is Moldarak, the boss so nice you had to fight him twice. Now this suggestion was actually submitted to me by ZeldaDungeon.net, and I feel really bad that I didn't give him this clip to do himself. But it was a good suggestion. He wanted to know what happens with Moldarak when he's underground. And it's really cool, especially the fact that even in the cutscene when you're first introduced to Moldarak, he actually is underneath the ground. Now if you've seen this show before, particularly the Warrior World episode, you'll know that most of the time when a boss or an enemy is a ground traveling enemy, they typically disappear when they're underground, and then when they spring up, they kind of warp into place. But Moldarak doesn't play by that game. Moldarak actually is underground the entire time, and the raised sand is exactly where Moldarak is at all times. So I wasn't sure how to edit this scene because it happened so quickly, but what happens in a second is a moment of brilliance. When Girahim is slashing at Impa, if you zoom the camera out, you can see that he's actually in the T pose, minus his arm that's actually in the camera shot. And what you get is pretty funny. I just wanted to take this awkward moment to explain that the classic look that you're seeing on Link right now is a custom texture that I made for this video. It's not in the game. I did it. Hope that doesn't bother anybody. I just like classic Link quite a great deal. Gabe Marsh wants to know, is there anything going on inside the Thunderhead while you're on the outside of it? And I don't mind taking a look, but if we do go in there, there's not much to see. There is one small island. Just one. I don't know why they kept that one island in, but it's there. All these Twitter requests are starting to go into sequence. Mossy Bread has a request for the imprisoned boss from far away to see the size and scale of him. And that's a pretty cool request. So when we dial back the camera during an imprisoned fight, you can see that the imprisoned's pretty tiny compared to this area. But I mean, that's all about perspective. Can you even see Link at this point? I think it's pretty safe to assume that this is every single person's favorite part of the game. Certainly mine. It's the time travel aspect in the ocean area. So cool. Now, there's a couple things I wanted to see. One is, what does it look like from up above? But more importantly, and more interestingly, what's going on down below? If we take the camera down below the water's surface, you can see that the entire ocean is always there. This is not the same case for the ground areas, but for the ocean, the entire body of water is always rendered in. The desert is only a top layer texture to hide it. Gotta say, with all these minecart tracks and various buildings, this is one of the best zoom outs I've ever done, ever. It's so amazing that all of this can exist into one screen. But then again, I'm used to games like Banjo-Kazooie where there's a ton of culling at all times. Thankfully, Wii games are a breath of fresh air in that regard, although Skyward Sword gave me a little bit of trouble too, since out of the box it comes with a watercolor filter, and the farther you zoom out, the more watercolored the background becomes. An art style choice to be sure, because they have nothing to hide here. So here's a different perspective and zoom outs for my favorite boss in Skyward Sword, Meticulous. Now I know that weird, creepy, baby-voiced golem thing with the sword is a lot of people's favorite boss fight, and it is pretty cool because you get to beat it up with a sword. Credit where it's due. But Meticulous reminds me of like an old school Kid Icarus boss. Something you'd see out of the 1980s for sure, where everything had either one eye or blue skin. But anyways, Meticulous is absolutely incredible. So glad that I was able to revisit this boss thanks to this episode. Okay, so this was just such an unusual request with such an unusual result, so I left it in. Eric asks, could you check what's beneath Dodos Hat on Fun Fun Island? Now this is incredibly strange, but if we look under Dodo's hat, we find the inside of Dodo's face. Now, I've seen this before, but this doesn't really happen anywhere else in Skyward Sword. So I'm baffled. I'm baffled that there was something there, and I apologize for how creepy it is. So really quick, I just wanted a close-up of Demise, especially in the scene where it shows he has more of a human form than what was let on. But more importantly, we get a look at his anti-master sword. I'm sure it has a real name, but to me, it's an anti-master sword. It has almost the same handle, and just like Link's sword, it has a Triforce on it, except with his, the Triforce is backwards. Now, I'm sure a lot of hardcore Zelda fans are rolling their eyes at me right now, but as a casual player, I'm only now noticing that the imprisoned scales are also on Demise's body. And this is absolutely because tensions are no longer high, and I can just settle down and take a look at this character in peace. And the last Twitter request we're going to cover is from The Vidiots, and they ask for the zoom out of the final area of the game. Well, no problemo. The only thing is that boundary breaking doesn't look so great when there's water involved, so it's not a very fantastic looking scene. But at least you get to see where the skybox ends and take a breather. Enjoy the scenery. So I thought I'd end this episode with Fee's farewell. And if you look behind her, you can see a glowing silhouette of where the Master Sword should be. It's pretty symbolic if you ask me. Guys, thank you so much for watching this week's episode. A big shout out to Zeltic, Zelda Informer, Zelda Dungeon, and Zelda Universe for all participating in this week's episode. You guys are amazing, and I really appreciate that you guys came on and did a guest spot for Skyward Sword. So next week is going to be Bomberman 64 or GoldenEye for the Nintendo 64.
Ooh, classics.
So, guys, vote for whichever episode you want to see next. And, Pat,
Derek?
how do I end this episode?
Do we plug in the Switch hype?
Nah, we'll save that for later. Wink. Alright, guys. Check out my playlist if you want to see some more videos.
In that box over there.
We pretty much have all the Zeldas in this box. So if you click the box, you can find the Zelda episodes, and you can enjoy to your heart's content.
Cherry pick.
Yeah.
Just for you.
But, alright guys, I will see you next week. Later.